Welcome back. Rhetoric Warriors podcast. We're playing the board game known as rhetoric. It's linguistic monopoly. Do not land on populist boulevard or pay a heavy price. Or not. maybe that's not a problem property anymore. So this is the show within the show, the Rhetorician Files, episode 16. 14 of these with Dr. D. Payne. And so we are back with David Payne today. I'm Dr. Dan, rhetorician, comedian. The podcast, we talk to comedians. I convert conservatives because they need it. And I talk to pro influencers and rhetoricians. I have a new book out, 21 Coliseums of Persuasion. Some people have actually bought it. I've been talking to people about it. And I'm going to launch a boot camp series where I actually go into each one of these and really drag you through some rhetorical bog, which should be
fun. You might be a podcast guest and then for other,
yeah, you know, it's kind of fascinating to watch people try to wrap their heads around persuasion has been studied for 2,500 years, like for real. They don't believe you. They're like, what? This has been around? Yeah.
It's kind of like being the oldest profession. It's the oldest study. Yeah.
So we're back in today's podcast episode. I don't know. There's just so much in here. Like this is literally careers can be made. Multiple careers can be made on this issue of money. That's essentially the core of it. The rhetoric of money.
Well, that's broader than I had prepared. Yeah, but you're right.
Yeah, but there's so many subterranean deep dives within that topic. We're going to talk some about class. I mean, it does. It just buries everything together, like capitalism. I've done business for the last 5 years, consulting and marketing, and that's been crazy. I never wanted to get anywhere near business, but it's been kind of interesting being inside the empire. Class, America, success, socialism, consumption, all these things are mixed into this concept of money.
Well, our guy Burke, we keep alluding to, sort of decided somewhere in 1945 it was all about money, and basically said, all the antagonism of religion toward money isn't so much that it's the root of all evil. It's that money is just so much more effective as a universal dissolver, a universal symbol that's capable of transforming and mutating into every other form. And anyway, that's a good launching point. It really is a rhetorical universal.
Yeah, and it's like
purely symbolic, right?
Yeah, and that concept of it's an irresistible force slamming into what seems like an immovable object of religion. But I would take money if I was a betting man. I would take money in that fight.
Well, I think the objective of most people is manage to reconcile the two, right? How to make money and still feel good about your spirituality is
yeah. But in the Clash of the Titans,
on the game board we're talking about.
On the game board, in the Clash of the Titans, money is Godzilla, and everything else is super big and like Mothra and everything. You're like, oh, how would you ever beat that? And then Godzilla just comes with the blue flame and just toasts everything. So
keeps coming back. Absolutely.
So just as foundation here, my background, first generation college, grew up working class in Louisville, Kentucky, in the edge between the city and the rural. Like we were literally right on the edge of the city. My father was a general contractor who worked for a company for a long time that his grandfather worked for, contracting out home remodeling. And then he couldn't deal with those people, or they couldn't deal with him. So he had to launch out and start his own business. So I saw that kind of evolution. So my family came in from the tobacco farms to do aluminum siding, the new aluminum siding into the houses after World War II. And then my father was first generation into that and started his own business and he did fine, but he didn't do like what a business person should do. And then my brother has come along underneath that, who got a business degree and worked in consulting for a long time, took over, started a general contracting business himself, but has run it like a business guy.
Right.
And so it's been interesting, that evolution, of working class into business class. And that's kind
From
of
worker to manager, right? As a generational move. Sure. And I think you'll see that repeated throughout agribusiness and all other kinds of working class. You get enough money, you educate the child, and the child launches into managerial class. Sure.
Yeah, and erases really the working class roots. My brother's not working class. He does not live like a working class person. I don't think he
Sure.
has working class values anymore. He doesn't really communalize in the same way. It's more about the individual rocketing up and into the, through the classes.
Well, I think that's something we have to address. I mean, you say it erases those roots. I think if we're looking just at income as one class marker, yeah. But I think part of the game board is that there's more than one set of class markers, and that we have a kind of a rhetorical class mobility. When the time is right to push the button, and you just did, in terms of your own, here you are, PhD entertainer, have had a hugely successful in terms of income. So by all markers, you're not living working class either, right?
Yeah, I'm living
but yet you talked about those roots.
Well, I'll say why I said that about him is like his values. It's not the money. Like he's made a lot of money, and he married into somebody who was upper middle at least, and so he adopted some of that. But some of the things that I consider to be like the rhetorical or the foundations, the working class foundations of, you don't just ascend by yourself. You bring community along. It's kind of like the NBA guys that have posse.
So he doesn't
that
celebrate and identify those roots the same way that you do, right? Is that roughly it?
Say it again.
My brother of the physician does not either, right? Sure.
Yeah. So I don't know. Do they leave that behind rhetorically? Do you have rhetorical stages that you can just drop away like rockets?
Well, yeah. I mean, the best I can call it is that there are these vestigial, or maybe another metaphor is the palimpsest, the thing you write upon and then erase, but the traces are still there. So I think rhetorically, it's a big mess, and there are times and places and issues on which they will identify that way, and others in which they will not. And some, and a huge category, and I think probably an increasing category, where we don't know what kinds of class things we're identifying with, that they're really unarticulated. So we might announce there's a 401k class, that people who are accumulating wealth in that particular fashion have interest that, and I think this is more and more true since 2008, are likely to think certain ways about certain things, right, and can be appealed to, even though they don't sort of see themselves as part of that. But you hear it all the time. I mean, if you listen, you can hear it all the time. If you start saying the stock market is a phony pyramid scheme, people say, well, yeah, my retirement is in there. I somehow deserve to earn 10% a year, and if I'm not, there is something wrong with the universe. By having accumulated that amount of money and doing nothing else but having accumulated that amount of money. And they will vote the same way. And I think that is a huge backdrop to the kind of current political schism we have. Thems that wanted bailouts and thems that didn't in 2008. Although, as far as I know, that class identity has never been really articulated. Yeah.
The investment class that you were talking about?
Right.
I like it. I mean, everybody talks about the working class, but there is no, I don't think I've seen anything that rhetorically gives them a label of the investment class.
Well, and even the working class is confused as to whether one attributes what they do as work. If you look at sheerly income levels, a lot of the working class is really in the upper, 40%. But although they're, we tend to think about them as less than that, if you ask who the working class are in terms of their specific incomes. And they're living that way, they're consuming that way, they're buying that way, their aspirations that way, how they're treating their children are that way. They're really living upper middle class, or at least the high end of middle class. Upper middle class is its own kind of designation of somebody making over 150,000, for instance, who really is in the upper 10% or so, right? So anyway, how we think about ourselves as class is not consistent with our income, basically. And those working class people sometimes think about themselves that way, and sometimes they do not, I guess is the upshot of what I'm saying.
Well, don't you think it's fascinating in some ways that this is, the most capitalist culture society that's ever been created, I think, on the planet, maybe the Dutch back in the 1600s. But there's so little awareness of what that actually means. There's so much slippage. There's so much non-information about all of this that even you bring up some guy like Marx, which nobody's ever read, and everybody loses their mind as if they understand any of that massive swath of intellectualism. I
Right.
just like we are living inside, all this capitalist storm, and people never see a single piece of it. It seems like.
Or they latch on to single pieces. I mean, that's the whole thing about ideology, right? Is that it's out there pumping out its stories and assumptions, and they don't know that that's what it is. So that there's a certain set of truisms that support, beliefs that support capitalist economics and ideology, and most people in this culture are in one form or another carriers of that, and that can be found even in religious beliefs or interpretations of religious beliefs, as well as evolutionary hypotheses. If you start listening for this stuff, well, yeah, the temperate people were more adaptable and therefore more survivable. White people, right? I mean, and so, people have picked up these little shards of religion and science and economics, and they may all bundle up into a support of capitalist ideology. But you're right, historically, I don't think we have much sense of where we are in that. And I think that's probably, for instance, if I look at the Russian oligarch system, and I don't know a lot about it, but it looks kind of like feudalism to me. And if you look at a society that was feudalist until 1917, launched an attempt to become industrialists for the next 40 some years or whatever, and still has those vestiges. What we don't ask about ourselves, and sort of some people trying to emulate or revere that system, or how those oligarchical impulses are also present in our own culture. So.
Yeah, I think it's funny now, like Bezos going into space, right? Like, and everybody suddenly sees Bezos, like, oh, they see him as like, oh, this guy's a human being, he's doing something, and they can launch into that, right? They can be like, oh, keep him in space, don't let him back on the Earth, all this stuff, because he's doing something human. When I don't know anything about Jeff Bezos other than his name and Amazon.
But don't we have like at least 3 oligarchs headed to space? Tesla and Elon Musk and Brannigan, right? I think all are exploring space programs.
Yeah, I mean they're all like, well, I conquered this planet. I guess I need to see what else is out there.
The cash flow of a small country, I can do this.
It is fascinating to watch somebody like Richard Branson, who has kind of won capitalism, right? Where these other guys, Musk and Bezos, have not, I think, or even Gates. I think Bezos and Gates have been agnostic. Musk keeps trying to get into the popular culture and be cool and deviant. And then Branson was able to mix a morality, a social justice morality into his brand, where people, he feels like this feel-good guru who owns 400 companies and it's worth $3 billion. But it is that oligarchy, and that's kind of the thing I think is, I see it's interesting when people start all these invisible mixings of these world, like how well capitalism can just invisibly be mixed into Christianity or to social justice. When you watch sports on the weekend, it's corporation after corporation going, man, we are doing so much for this planet and for these people. I'm like, well, thank God you're there, Coca-Cola.
Right.
But
that would require sports to do that.
But that ether never gets really examined, right? It's just the air we breathe. Like that, when you talked about the oligarchs, that's such a cool.
Well, having directed a few dissertations that kind of tried to explore some of the corporate and worked with people from business schools that yeah, they don't really want to look at that ideological substratum at all. It's pretty fascinating. But to me, the very fact that we are talking this way, and everybody's going to know who Bezos and Musk and what their relative income is, and you know, some of the enterprises of their small country status. That to me says it all, right? I mean, that these are cultural touchstones of various sorts, in that accumulated wealth. As we follow the imperial divorce of Bill and Melinda.
Did you see the meme that somebody wrote about the two richest guys on the planet couldn't keep their wives happy? What chance do you have? So Gates and Bezos both lost. It's like, well, there you go.
Well, so yeah, money can't buy you whatever, right? Or it can, and that's the reason. Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating. So like when you look at the mythology, the messaging and the storyism building up around these things, it does try to capture some of that stuff. And again, the cool thing about rhetoric is you can go back in and rescue some of the themes out of the stories, whether they're built consciously that way or not. But the villains, like oligarchs, is a villain. That's a news villain, right?
Right. And if it's a Russian in the United States, he's still an oligarch, but an American that has accumulated $200 billion is not an oligarch, right?
Yeah. So we've got a capitalist boogeyman of one villain category, which is an oligarch. But what are the other capitalist villains? Do we have them?
Well, but let's not
used to be robber barons.
Ignore that there are people with oligarch envy, right? That they're increasingly vocal portion of the population really seems to want that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, clearly Trump wants to be an oligarch.
Well, and a lot of this is pitted over and against. Yeah, he certainly have oligarch envy, and he's loved by those that have oligarch envy. But that's pitted over and against the seething term socialism, which now, right, occupies more ideological space than ever. Any notion of public weal or public good, or even the right to do something for the public, is a socialist leaning. So.
Well, it becomes a capitalist sin, right? Spending your money as a group on another group. Like that's a sin, I guess, in sort of primary individualism-driven capitalism, which is.
Not if you go back and look at the original capitalists. No, not at all. I mean, that's a more recent ideological purification. That's so. Yeah.
But it's clearly the one they're playing, right? Like it, and you hear the whole taxes stuff that Reagan started, right? As a nice little rhetorical deploy where he could hide a bunch of class oppression and hatred of others and everything else within the welfare mother and tax. They're overtaxing us and all this kind of stuff. I mean, that was all sort of just a nice sublimated way of using taxes and a capitalist rhetoric to overlay social hate. The fact that we don't need to take care of these people. If you don't take care of them, they will take care of themselves. Like we are forcing them to stay in a welfare cycle by giving them our money.
Sure. And that whole self-reliance, dignity of pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, that's one of the mythic, foundations, I think, of the capitalist system. Sure.
Well, that's the individualism. And I keep finding this. I'm working on a column about it because I see so many people wanting to jump over and pull the cloak of individualism over themselves as this holiness. And like, this is freedom and to be me and I get to make my own decisions. And I'm like, yeah, but you live in a collective. So you affect everybody around you. And capitalism has a really hard time, I think, with that division. So people who are communalists are going to be socialists. They want to spread money around to people who need it. Individualists don't want to do that at all. They just want to be like, I want my pile.
Well, it's people wrapping themselves into one of the branches of individualism. Yeah. But, in terms of intellectual history and American philosophy and it's in all of those strands of culture, The USA the American culture has been struggling with this from the beginning, more or less, because it is the ascension of the American society is the growth of capitalism and the growth of industrialism. And all of those things are, and slavery, and all of those things are conflated. All of those things are conflated. But the single theme of sorting out the relationship between individual and society is the heart of American pragmatism. And so from around 1880 to 1920s, and so that all those themes really occupied us in philosophy and psychology. So yeah, and still today, it's been a steady kind of ideological evolution.
So
what happens to these warrants about taking care of each other in society, and even the pragmatic orientation that not having other people in jail might actually be a good thing for other people, for everybody.
It makes me think back to George Bush, the senior, and his 1,000 points of light, which I always admired as a rhetorical pivot. It's like, no, we're all supposed to be taking care of these people, not just dumping money into a big pot to take care of these people. Ergo, stay away from my pot of money, And I'm like, oh, that's a nice little story move there. Like, you should be out there finding the campfires where they need you. They need more kindling, and you should be helping your own people.
Yeah, I'm matched up on the the noblesse oblige of becoming super wealthy and giving billions of dollars to charity. So it's all wrapped up in super individualism, self-control, and our attitudes about government, which
poor government. I mean, yeah. it took it from the rebel 60s, the youth forever, and now it's taking it from the the old baby boomers who have gone over to MAGA and everything else and attacking it from there. It's like, how is it still standing at this point with this many fronts that it's been battling?
Well, there's a lot of nervousness out there about that very question. At some point, you got to separate the talk from the reality. I mean, something's got to keep people all agreeing to drive on one side of the road. I mean, there is some. It gets really messy when you start scrambling all those eggs.
Yeah, that's the whole thing about anarchy, right? It's nobody stays on their side of the road. So
the role in government in that coordination is an interesting thing.
So we kind of launched into this when we were visiting last week when you guys were up here, and we were talking about the future, and as we both getting older and looking like what comes next. And you've gone through the system for a long time and have retirement, and now we're figuring out how to make that last until you can gasp and choke your way off the planet. So
right.
That's what made you start thinking about investment, because you've been moved maybe unwillingly into the investment class, and that's now where you are.
Sure. Well, I have to pay attention to that, and certainly penalized probably from having neglected it so much. Everybody else can look at their 401ks with greater drama than I can. I made 30%. I lost 30% this year. That's right. But yeah, I think we were talking about it in the we were attending the funeral of my 99-year-old stepmother. And the retirement models on people's IRAs and 401ks charts you out to how much you have to withdraw each year to have $0 left when you're 97. This is the model. For 2 years, babe, you're on your own. Right?
You probably won't know where you are at that point anyway. So it's like, we're just going to.
And meanwhile, fewer than half of the people in the United States even have such savings.
Oh, I can't imagine. My career.
No, I think that's a real thing. Fewer than half of the people in the United States have savings beyond Social Security. I mean, it may have changed by a few percentage points in the last 5 years. As I've seen, all these numbers are kind of moving around a little bit, but something like that.
Yeah, I totally believe that. I mean, again, coming from my background, and I've worked in such fragmented ways across industries and things. I have really high years and really low years, and not being able to predict, like that, like a 401k build and a retirement and that kind of stuff. I can't imagine that most of America still has that stability where they can predict that and they
Sure.
choose to follow that structure.
Well, and once again, I think the way that we do this and our expectations shift so radically. Once you start talking to these finance guys about retirement models and how much your income's going to be and charting your life out to age 97. When you sign up for Social Security, it's really quite complicated. I actually had to attend a seminar or two about this, right? About when to take your money and whatever. When do you break even on the models, right? So you're really getting into this sort of actuarial consciousness.
Oh God, that sounds horrible.
It's horrible, but yeah. If you retire at, if you take early at 62, it's one kind of thing happens. If you retire at 66, now at 67 for most people, and then if you wait till 70, right, you break even around 82. So you're going to have to make a wager here about how long you think you're going to live. Anyway,
no, oh my God.
Yeah, and then to try to put knowledge into that and investment schemes that
well, and then what about
insurance schemes?
And then go back into class consciousness. Look what you're doing, right? You are disavowing, the whole move into the investment and into the numbers, the numbered life.
Well, right? This is a religious observance to look at what the market did or didn't do in any given day to even chart the numerical actuarial arcs here. This is a daily prayer book of some sort, because if it goes down real bad, people like you lose, and I think that's a kind of a subterranean struggle right here between the haves and the have-nots. And the haves just expanded all these people, once again, to sort of say, but you can't talk bad about the market or the fact that it's overvalued or ridiculous or a scam, because that's where our retirement is. So my expectations to continue my middle class, and always middle class, regardless of how much money you have, existence all depends upon that. So
they pull everybody into the mosh pit of the money and the numbers, and therefore you are now invested, and you will let them continue the masquerade ball.
Well, it's a political fact. We don't really want, I think this is the Trumpers and the Bernie bros over and against the centrists, the evil centrists, whose basic compact is the bailout and keeping the market alive, regardless of what levels of fiscal, absurdity might attend to that task. And I have to say, when push came to shove, I had to, this is, what is your class consciousness? Yeah, I really don't want the bottom of the economy to fall out. Not just to preserve my savings at that point, but also I just didn't think it would fix itself. This was the other core belief, which I think is probably not very solid economics. If you look at the Great Depression, it really wasn't that much fun for most people.
Yeah,
it didn't fix itself.
Right? You don't see a lot of the good side of the Depression still, in the mythology of the culture.
People learn to value family a lot more. We hear the stories.
Yeah, that Dust Bowl, that looked like a good time.
We were poor, but we didn't know we were poor. But yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, like the idea of being pulled into that investment consciousness, that it's a part of your everyday consciousness. That's some real estate you don't really want to give away, right? You don't really want that whole rhetoric sitting in your head.
Yeah, I guess I haven't really found the proper antidote to it. Drugs are probably not an option at this stage of life.
Damn, reality. What?
Blues music won't provide permanent relief, so I don't know.
So when you look at this again, like you're projecting where you are, where you've been, you've had a long history in the university, and now y'all are at a place, and then you're looking at the future. So you're at this little juncture of,
Right,
if you
there's
do,
this horrendous futurism to it. That's right. Yeah.
yeah. So the investment, it's like a highway into the future, right? Like even you either that highway is going to go all the way to 100, or you're going to be forced off at some rest stop somewhere, or pushed off, a bridge, whatever. And I guess that's kind of the way you end up having to look at it, like a trajectory, a linear trajectory with that money is taking you through.
Right, and I guess at least for me, I don't know. I hadn't thought about it till your description, but the other taproots of identity seem to be drying up left and right. In other words, it becomes kind of an identity. Right? So that's more class consciousness, more consciousness of spending my time doing that. That's right.
You mean like they're drying up, like as you get older, like the different identity roots,
Yeah,
like
you move away
parent,
from being a professor. I mean, at
professor?
some point, you're going to go to the old folks' home, just be one of those old guys, and somebody might tell the story of what you were, but yeah, or you might go around telling it to everybody. It doesn't really matter too much, right?
I tell you, my most interesting up close experience of that was when I was in LA and I was in the Writers Guild. They have a whole medical system just for writers and actors and producers. And so they have their own hospitals, their own doctors, everything. It's all covered within the guilds. And so my wife at the time had to get a small hernia operation. So I went in and I was sitting at the hospital, the Hollywood, the guild hospital, and they also had a rest home there for old producers and writers and actors and directors. And it was like some scene from Cuckoo's Nest. I was sitting there in the waiting area, and all these old guys kept getting wheeled in that I'd seen as character actors throughout the 70s. I'm like, oh, that guy was on the Love Boat. This guy over here was
In
on
the Love
Green.
Boat. That was exactly.
And I just was looking around at my pop culture experience, just had aged into wheelchairs. And yeah, they had big lives. These guys were super famous. Everybody would recognize them, but there they are sitting in their wheelchair in, Toluca Lake.
Yeah, that's and that's what you got left is the little pot of money that's going to feed you more than just to afford a decent old folks home is going to require significant outlay of cash, right?
Yeah, maybe the baby boomers are going to, because there's so many of them, they keep moving through in, massive herd through these different experiences. Maybe they'll balk enough at what old age is basically set up as in America that'll be forced to evolve some.
Well, but once again, there's a form of talking about boomer, and I hear a lot of boomer talk, anti-boomer rhetoric from the Xers and millennials to some extent. And for one thing, first of all of that's just bullshit. Those terms and categories were invented by advertising agencies. They really are symbolic identities that have no meaning whatsoever. Sure. Boomers, the difference between somebody born in 1946 and somebody born in 1964 is fairly horrendous. Yet to consider them all boomers really has, but one thing that it does is it disguised the fact to many people that the boomer age group is split about 50-50, the same way as the Gen X group is split about 50-50 in most political stuff. So for instance, I heard somebody, well, those boomers all bought into Reagan's trickle down theory. No. Basically somewhere, and it depends because they don't really divide the voting groups up according to those silly categories of boomer age groups. They divide them up by decades. But if you kind of finagle with those numbers, fewer than half of the boomer group voted for Reagan. But it's really fairly consistent and not broken down by those generational classes at all in terms of who voted for who then or probably last year either. So anyway, that's really an obscurant bit of folklore rather than, and once again, it ascribes all this to something other than class consciousness. So we're not thinking about, gee, we're divided here and we're voting in ways about our interests that really should be informed by, other things other. Furthermore, I think there are other ways of breaking out class in our culture. Education is one that Income is only one. Wealth is another, and it's not the same thing as income, because a lot of people have wealth that they didn't earn and achieved it in different kinds of ways. But education, so one's identification with lower class. So here you and I are both working class guys from working class families with PhDs. And income's variable, right? Across the trajectory of our careers. So anyway, there's different ways of, once again, it's rhetorically malleable. And we are ourselves mobile. We can identify as working class people. And the other thing that I think has to get said here before we try to get too analytic about the class confusion is that I think one of the reasons why we have so little class consciousness is because of we map all of the same stuff onto race, and I don't think you can really ignore that race is another one of these obscuring constructs. So blue collar whites and blue collar blacks don't see themselves as conjoined all the time, when they might be, or middle class whites and middle class blacks for that matter.
Yeah, is it the fact that this sort of group consciousness that it becomes such a strong rhetorical platform that there's so many options that it gets diluted across this? Because I've had this discussion a lot throughout academics and just in general about, I feel a stronger class consciousness, I think, than most people, because I was sort of hurdled through the education system by the fact that I was good at academics and I could write. But my classness, like every time I moved up, like I remember starting grad school at UT and the feminists just destroying me for the brutality of my gender language and the fact that I like to joke about gender. I'm like, I went back home to Kentucky after the first semester at UT for Christmas, and I was listening to my buddies, and they were just harsh jokes about gender constantly. It's just part of the culture. And I'm like, oh my God, they've turned up this antenna in my ear where I can now not hear the genderness of this humor. And so I got pulled through it, and I kept getting class lessons over and over again versus me being able to give them class lessons and say, hey, this is the way we talk down here. So, get off.
And it may just be a generational phenomenon that you're not hearing the same kind of divergence about race, right?
Well, it wasn't part of it really wasn't.
But we know what people in factories are saying in Kentucky or Kansas about race.
Kentucky was so homogenous when I was growing up. I didn't know any black people until I went to high school, and that was dudes on my football team. Right. Who my high school football coach from Chicago went and recruited out of the West End of Louisville these great athletes and pulled them over to this white Catholic high school, right. And we suddenly won the state championship. Look at that. That was the first black guys that I ran into, and I didn't have any Latino or really Asian interaction at all. So it wasn't part of my consciousness at all.
But you did hear racial language and racial jokes, I assume.
Not really. Not where I grew up, like the South End. It wasn't super redneck. It was my grandparents from Indiana were super racist, and I would hear them every once in a while. I'd be like, that sounds weird, but it wasn't part of it just wasn't part of the milieu at all.
Right. Okay. In an all-white Catholic school. Right?
Yeah, but it wasn't the South. So there wasn't enough interpenetration of the races, and even in my high school, for it to be an issue. I mean, yeah, you could hear rednecks say stuff every once in a while, but there just weren't enough black people around to trigger actual conflict.
Well, there you go. Right. It isn't the most immediate thing in the environment at that time. Sure.
But there was plenty of.
I'm just saying, I think there's a parallel story there about race. But.
When I saw it with class, again, I sort of saw it like it was pretty homogenous in class too when I was growing up. Then I went to college, and I started interacting. I went to a fairly working class college at the University of Dayton, but there were some people there with too much money, and it always felt weird when I was suddenly around them, because I was going through college with no money, and they were going.
Yeah, not only had I not encountered many black people, but I hadn't encountered many rich people.
I hadn't seen any of it. Like all I had was a class hatred when I saw a BMW. Right. Nice cars triggered me. But that was pretty strong, and it was an existential, like it had been baked in. I still feel it. Like anytime I'm around high culture, I can feel that, angst.
Well, Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe you can refine your angle here, but to me, I see the breathing of class rhetorically. Gallup runs a little poll that sort of says, which of 5 classes would you sort yourself into? And somewhere around 43% as of 2017, whatever, said they're middle class. That's if you're asked. But in terms of rhetorical appeal, I would say, well, I guess to footnote that, another part of that is the farther away from abject poverty you get, the less likely you are to identify yourself lower. So if you're under $20,000, you're clearly lower class. But people even in the upper zone of that start thinking of themselves as middle class. They don't want to think about themselves as lower class. And that's someplace where race factors in. Well, at least I'm not in this situation, right?
Sure.
Even though I may be working, what is a basic minimum wage job pay? Around 12,000 a year or something like that. It really takes. One of the first things I did when my kids graduated from college was say, I want you to get a piece of paper and write down your budget, what it would take to actually live. And it takes about $2,000 a month just to even perform life, even if you got dad and mom to bail you out on health insurance and car repairs, or car loans or whatever.
Yeah.
You really cannot accomplish life on much less than $25,000 a year. Yet somewhere, I looked it up, about 20% of the people as individuals make less than that.
So one out of 5 people is making less than 25,000 a year.
Yeah. At any rate, but the people at the upper end of that poverty class start thinking about themselves as middle class. And then if you get up to around 30 or 40,000, between $30,000 and $40,000 a year, about 80% of them, instead of identifying themselves as lower class, start identifying themselves as middle class, right? And if you look on the other end of that, if you're making $120,000 a year, you're clearly in the upper 10%, I think, of incomes. How many people making $120,000 a year think about themselves as upper class? Almost none. Even when you get to the, say $250,000 a year, they may be aware of themselves in terms of disposable incomes as having, being in the upper echelons, but politically, in terms of their identity, they still think about themselves as upper middle class. They will start saying, I'm upper middle class. Let's put it that way, right? So even how people report themselves as class membership doesn't line up with how rhetorically that's operationalized. If you listen to what politicians say, they never talk about poor people at all, period. And basically it's all about middle class. And people who are truly upper class, that is, say the upper 5%, earning around $500,000 or more, which is a little higher, about 3.5%, upper 3.5%, something like that. They don't talk at all about, so they're just not even objects of this discourse. So it's really all. So I would say the rhetorical middle class is somewhere around $15,000 to $400,000 a year. Well, that doesn't tell you anything about, right? The difference is so drastic there between what you actually, the kind of life that you're actually living, is that's only sort of as the object of this discourse, middle class values, middle class, it's like being an American. It is a completely empty construct.
So do you think if we really fleshed out class earlier for people in the educational process, is that a sort of Rosetta Stone into understanding capitalism? And
well, we don't start with understanding it better ourselves. I think we probably.
Well, we clearly don't, right? I mean, we're sitting here, and how often do you think about this?
Well, but I, as you said that, I thought about the political problem. That's going to be more liberal, right? Critical race theory kind of problem. You're teaching class conflict. And all that means to me, I think, is that we probably are teaching class stuff, but we won't call it that ever. Right.
Well, it starts from the critical school, right? I mean, that's what critical race theory was based in. It's just.
But what does our educational system really say? It really, the public school system, at least it did for me. Now, I'm sure it's undergone radical mutation. But you can be anything you want to be. It teaches the mobility, and education is the key to that mobility, right? And in one symbolic universe, that is true. If you accumulate, and I think that's a political fact, Thomas Frank is really keen on this about the Democrats, having turned into this graduate school.
Yeah.
James Carville was ragging about faculty lounge politics the other day. That this kind of stuff only makes sense in the faculty lounge, or the graduate degree people as a singular class, right? And I think there is something to that whatever your income, if you have a postgraduate degree, you're almost 100% Democrats, and at least very high, and they do not think about themselves as lower class. That's a different way of being classed. So sorry to confound the problem even more.
No, and it is. It's, again, all these problems. Every time I run into something, it just becomes a pie with a bunch of different slices.
But back to the question about educational program about this singular problem, is that the ideology that we teach is class mobility, and that's why you should learn your stuff here now, because we don't want to sort of say, well, look, kids, you're all poor, and you're not likely to get a very good job. So why don't we open?
It's not a great offer. That's not a great American offer.
Open your new math book and think about algebra. It's not going to work very well. So
I had a joke one time about we keep trying to supposedly teach capitalism, to the third world. I'm like, if you really want to teach capitalism to Africa, take all the aid money and give it to one kid, in one village. And then just see what happens, because then they'll learn, what capitalism is really about. One kid is accumulated.
I like it. Well, they do have these little game simulations where they break people out. I played them, I guess, in school, where you could, certain people had certain privileges according to the rules of the game, and so you could sort of break out class consciousness that way.
Yeah, a little bit. But the idea of privilege, again, this quickly becomes impacted with everything, right? Like the slices of the pie just become so thin because there's so many things stuffed into it. But when you start getting into class privilege, so I got some blowback back in Kentucky from the professor thing when I got my PhD. My dad, he came to my class once. I kept hounding him, like, come and watch my lectures when I was teaching at the University of Louisville. And he finally did. And about 10 minutes in, he started reading a Reader's Digest in the back row. And I'm like, hey, student, you can't just read a book while I'm lecturing. And he's like, whatever. And, he put it away. And afterwards, I'm like, why'd you do that? He goes, I didn't understand a thing you were talking about, and you were boring me. I'm like, fair enough. I said, but you kept, you wanted to sort of see what was what. And you did this to me forever. My first set of jokes when I started into stand-up was about working with my father and how people don't understand their own expertise, like the level. He's a general contractor, and he has a van that has every tool known to man. He's got the original hammer and nails, that were left over from putting Jesus on the cross in this thing. And he's got a name for every single thing in there that's art, that's some kind of intricate. And he'll be like, hey, go get the high arc radio coping saw with the safety trigger on it. And I'm like, I don't know what that looks like. And I'd come back like a screwdriver, and he'd be like, what the hell is that? I'm like, so trying to get him to understand that he's imposing this kind of class expertise, this working class expertise. And all his buddies were electricians, mechanics, and they would all come over and hang out. And I couldn't talk to them.
Right.
And so I ascended up in one way, and I descended totally in the other for the cachet of what knowledge is useful in that class.
Sure.
And I became useless to them.
Sure. Well, yeah, I think there are lots of hierarchies out there, and so we can be classed in different kinds of ways. How those take shape and then dissolve in rhetorical transactions is what you want to move, what you want to track. But we haven't even talked about education, but the technical classes, right? Absolutely. And so, Burke has a line that, well, the social classes are mysteries to each other, right? And we feel guilty about those kinds of categories. But the technical classes they're just embarrassment because they don't share the same language. And so you don't know whether what it is to be a fourth degree computer scientist, or a surgeon, or even a plumber. So each of those sort of has its own kind of hierarchy and its own kind of vocabulary bubble. Sure.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know. I watch this stuff again, sort of moving across these very strong life worlds of entertainment now, rhetoric and academics over here, and business. And whenever I wander through those different worlds, I have to completely shift over to a new terminology, a new orientation, because they don't travel well between each other. And I get into business. It's funny now. There's an app called Lunch Club where you can do 15-minute conversations with people all over the world. And all day long on Saturday, they will randomly hook you up with people on this app. And so I've talked to, like, in one 2-hour setting, I was talking to somebody from Cairo, somebody in Japan, somebody in Bangladesh, and they're all business people, right? They're all on there because they need to hook into either more customers or whatever they're trying to sell in some way or another. But as soon as I drop the rhetoric stuff on them, it just fractures everything. They don't know what to do. Suddenly it becomes a political and a rhetorical discussion instead of a business discussion. And it's interesting to them. There's enough hook, within rhetorician that they're like, what is that? But you can just feel it. At some point, they just drag it back over into, like, the guy selling insurance to me this week, who was from Miami. He kind of listened for about 3 minutes and he's like, great. And then he just launched into his pat bullshit about insurance. But those worlds, as you drag class in between them, like entertainment in Hollywood has a class distinction. Like, once you move up to a level
Sure.
of Hollywood, and I moved back to Austin, which is all amateur entertainment, versus, I've made money in entertainment for over 30 years. None of them have made a dime. And suddenly it's like this weird fracture of the world. So I don't know, like, as I travel through these things and I try to hold on to some type of central theme for myself so that I can make sense as I move around there, it definitely is identity challenging. You're doing a lot of identity management.
To be sure. And how you are identified, and once again, we work to create those kinds of identifications. And some of them are restrictive, but just to even be social, and I found it more and more difficult in my social groups as time goes on, because there's just how much can you put in your head? Keeping track of sports got to be, but sports is certainly one of the big ones, right? And now I think the stock market is another one of those, of people of a certain age, that you've got to be able to engage in a certain amount of because if there's nothing left, you can't do sports, you can't do politics. What's left of you here? But certainly, most people don't even want to venture into your professional specialty. So it's nice to try, but yeah, I had one of those moments talking once again to one of these financial advisors about what the rest of your life kind of thing, your money, and the rest of your life. Well, he's going, I have an MBA and you have a PhD, as though there was some sort of equivalence here, but there's nothing about my PhD that makes me able to manage a dime. Now, I suppose, had I been like many of my PhD cohorts, I would have started watching the market in my 401k 35 years ago with total, whatever.
Just think of all the brain
and I
you
have
would
no
have
idea
wasted
what they
on
teach
that.
in MBA school. No clue whatsoever. I just know that whatever he's doing has made him rich, and whatever I did didn't.
Rich with money.
To that.
He was rich with money. He wasn't rich with
money.
intellectualism. Come on.
I have no idea. He might read voraciously for all I know, but
I don't know. Like, even I think as we're talking about this, I think about me wandering back into talking to academics. Like, I haven't done really hardcore academics since grad school. I haven't kept up with
Full contact academics, right?
Yeah, I haven't kept up with any of this stuff. I know enough of it, and I'm conversant enough that I feel fine. But it'd be easy to discredit me and rip away my academic identity. Like when you tell people, I tell people I taught college. I was on a faculty twice, on a full faculty line a couple of times, and the rest I kind of piecemealed together as I was doing other things. But they don't understand the difference between instructor, assistant professor, associate, full professor with tenure, all that kind of
Sure.
stuff. They don't know those hierarchies. All they know is college professor. And so like,
And many regard that with great suspicion. That's right.
yeah. And, you and I just talking like this, I sometimes get the feeling like with you, like you have got a much stronger academic identity. That was your field. That was your thing for a long time. So like, do you feel iffy about talking at this level where it's not controlled discourse? It's not controlled intellectualism. Is it high enough intellectualism and rhetoric for you to feel like some, I don't know, feel good about it as an identity marker? Like these kind of discussions?
Boy, I'm not sure quite what you're asking. I mean, is there a difference in making talk in the institutional setting or institutional form that earn you merit badges and
Right.
and credentials, and this is a lesser form somehow?
Well, I saw like Jennifer Mercia, the professor
Right.
from A&M that I interviewed. She was on CNN this weekend,
Yeah.
doing little talking head things on Brian Stelter or whatever his name is, his show. And I watched her undergo, and I did a lot of this when I was doing as a producer. People coming not from entertainment do not know how to talk in entertainment. They can't boil themselves down to what entertainment does. And she got like 6 intellectual points in within about 25 seconds. And I'm like, you just blew everybody's brain apart. Nobody knows anything you're talking about. But it was fun to watch, but I'm sure like what she would experience, even talking to her on the podcast, if she were to try to do a lot more entertainment talk, a lot more of appearances, they would boil her down to 2 or 3 lines and then a bunch of emotional flurry around it. And she would learn that, and that's a high quality appearance in that world. It's a very low quality appearance in academics.
Sure.
So which one do you base your identity on? I guess is your identity valuation, I guess is my point.
I guess I hadn't thought about it in terms of identity. I think in terms of when I assess the things that we've talked about and reflect on them, I kind of wish I had sometimes more preparation or a more, because you'll ask a question I haven't really thought about, and or sometimes you will ask a question and this is kind of the stock answer I've given to myself and I haven't really thought about it. So I think I have more of those kinds of moments where there's more uncertainty about that. I think that would probably, yeah, sure, if it were a TV show or something like that where there's an immediate flow and right, the commercial break's coming, whatever, you would be far more conscious of that, or more immediate audience. So
well,
no, this is not. I've not really turned into Dave the podcaster yet. In terms of identity.
Maybe you have. I mean, the nice thing about podcasting is
there you go.
It's not really defined. We get some ideas in here and we get some conversational flow and there's a little bit of entertainment and there you go. All right. It's as good as anything else in podcasts.
Yeah. Well, this is occurred largely without feedback and also with your facilitation and
which is the way I like it. I don't like a lot of feedback.
There you go.
So we talked about this. You sent me the text on Bo Burnham. I thought it was awesome. I thought it was just really fun to watch that guy use what was around him and all that time. And he nailed it.
Well, there's some really brilliant moments in there, right? I mean, there were some things I was told speech students never start wrapping up until you're ready to be wrapped up. Because after you start the move toward finishing, you can't get the audience back. and he ended about 6 times there. That got a little nerve-wracking for him. Maybe it was all an intentional thing to where I was almost relieved when he was done. But yeah, there's some really smart moments happening there, right?
Yeah, I would love to. I don't know if I'll do this because I don't really like to tear things apart as much like that anymore. But aesthetically, just watching that, like he had no borders between bits. He cut in the middle of bits. He wasn't giving you any meta signals about, hey, this is what's coming, and is this real or not? Am I really depressed? Is this still more of the act? Like he wouldn't give you any of those markers. He was like, I'm in the simulation world, and I do it really well, and I'm comfortable here, and you just track whatever you want.
And the kinds of technical things he achieved just by himself, they're pretty remarkable, I thought. Well, maybe you should try to interview him. He said he had quit stand up for 5 years, and this was kind of bringing himself back because of the social starvation or whatever of COVID.
Yeah, that was a funny bit. So let's finish up this class stuff. So what else about your investor identity? Like this forced investor identity that you've assumed? Are you starting to feel more comfortable with it? Do you feel like it's still an add-on and you're like just wearing a mask?
Yeah, boy, I think it's a complicated thing for me as I get into it, and the different kinds of psychoses and paranoias that it's into it. So I think I think most people do retreat, and there's a big market to be had. I sort of avoided that. The first thing was that if you really do not seem to have any credentials, they actually give you a test when you go in to see how much risk you can tolerate. And if you go pretty low on that, they try to sell you an annuity, which means you just give them all your money and they'll give it back to you a little bit at a time. And they make it sound pretty good.
That's funny.
I said, no, I'm going to pass on that, which entered me into another echelon of investor talk of people who don't sell annuities but are going to manage your wealth in a certain kind of way. And once again, all roads lead to the market as the only game in town, really. So one has to then adopt my relationship to the stock market is far more complicated and involved at this point than I ever had a relationship with the church.
That's funny.
Just for instance.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah.
The priesthood and the rewards and punishments and the redemption schedule is all far more clear to me than if I had been a trained Catholic.
Well, and they're going to make you suffer in this life, right?
Well, there is that. Redemption is essentially an economic construct, a buying back. That's why both coupons and souls get redeemed, I guess. But anyway, so I guess I'm still fairly nascent. I managed to accumulate a fair bit of savings along the way by not paying attention and not living a very extravagant lifestyle. And now, once again, this idea of managing it for 30 years or so, depending, right? Whatever, progeny, and my wife, which might live to who might live to an old age. So it's an awesome, but I have a mixed feelings about the identity involved in that. So I could engage in more of a confessional here, having started by buying a little bit of pot stock.
There you go. That's a good
just to see what happens. And it goes up and down. It makes no sense whatsoever, as far as I can tell. It's like many of these other things, just all a crock.
Yeah, but that's a nice, for 60s hippies, that's a nice investment, right? At least it gives you a little bit of,
I figured if the ex-speaker of the House could go all in on it, John Boehner, right? Yeah, it was now permissible to do. So anyway, I just to see what would happen there, and I was encouraged by somebody else to do that. But it sort of expanded into now FANG stocks. You don't want to know. Yeah, the big ones: Google, Apple. Anyway, Amazon. Right. These are kind of the pantheon of things that one would be invested in, and they're kind of being. So yeah, just even learning crap like that is
right. Suddenly, this now is in your head. It's now living in there, and you're thinking through that filter. that deterministic
with
screen.
some resistance and hopefully a little bit of humor and detachment. But
yeah, you got to keep a little distance from your deterministic screen, right? You don't want to shove your face into the screen door where that's all you
made
can
my peace
see.
with it. I sort of told the last guy, I said, well, I'll tell you what, when Elizabeth retires, you can manage all of her money. She's going to live to 100. She'll need somebody. And she's definitely successful at not thinking about any of this. So I'll spend it all and die. So that would be that's my plan at this point.
Yeah, almost everybody I went to college with. So I ended up going to an engineering kind of tech college, University of Dayton, just because I got a scholarship there from the Catholic school to a Catholic school. So I was a writer, creative in the middle of all these kind of accountants and engineers that were my buddies, and they all went into some kind of money. One guy ended up getting a finance degree, MBA from Stanford, and started a fund, and manages people and does advising, and he's made tons and tons and tons of money, and to the point where can't even get to him anymore. We're not really into much contact, but the few things that I've seen that it's done to his working class personality, because he and I were hardcore working class coming up, and is that it just obliterated it. Like he's just totally full on MAGA Trump, libtards, all that kind of stuff. There's so much identity, I don't know, shoved on him, or that marker is so strong when you make that much money, 20, 30, 40 million dollars, that you find some kind of harbor within that identity. And it just seems like there's no other place. Like it just
what I was wanting to say is, let's don't lose, for all of this, let's don't lose the rhetorical and political salience of this investment class thing. And that, among the Trump domain, that's a really interesting one, because there is this ethos of the working class rebellion and populism when their average income is really pretty high. The median income somewhere around 75, 80,000, something like that. So the kind of miss the brass ring Gen Xer heart of some of the more vocal and present working class dimensions of that, but there's a lot of the investment class that splits that direction, right? For whatever set of reasons, and those identifications. So even these divisions even occur among the investment class, and certainly once again all of the graduate degree people that are largely Democrat. They're also members of the investment class, and I think this is why so many of the even hard left and hard right, truly blue collar types look at that as there's no difference between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. There's no difference between Joe Biden. And you look at it, and you go, well, that's nuts. But from a gross class perspective, in terms of how their interests are wielded in political decisions, so how we're lumped together, and what we're betting on. How invested are you in this arc of the future? I was, the stock market went down last week, so I was Googling to find out what people saying about, doing. Well, and they're talking about, the stock market rumbled because the Fed says they might raise interest rates in 2023. Well, hell. Are they looking at 10 and 20-year models of inflation? These are actual guys talking on CNBC to the investor class to explain why somebody did or didn't sell their pot spot last week. Anyway,
yeah, well,
you are living in a massive abstract universe, right, of celestial proportions. Think about just, we could go down the rabbit hole of Bitcoin here. I mean, is it to me, a generation of people who grew up thinking Pokemon cards could have a certain inherent value because it had an image printed on it, are the perfect group to buy Bitcoin.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like they don't.
It is a Pokemon card, right?
Well, they don't need tangibility in their symbols.
Apparently not.
They're seeing they're so used to being to oscillating through symbols so fast, it doesn't have the same texture that it had for like us growing up reading books. You know, it does not ever slow down. They know more's coming. They know
It's
it's
like a
just a,
Pokemon card. We only printed 3 of these, therefore it has greater monetary value.
yeah. Now my son started to do that stuff of throw a little bit of money into Bitcoin and all that. And he's probably the right guy to do it because he's completely malleable about what's going on, but he has a hyper awareness because he's online all the time and he's got communities to talk to online and he doesn't know who to trust or whatever, but he's got some vetting skills because he's been doing this vetting people online for years and years and years. So it's a very different world. I don't even know like class is going to make any sense to him. Like it's all exploded through the computer and the money's an abstraction and the things that have value are a super abstraction, but I can't speak in that world. I have no idea how to be conversant there.
Well, it could well be that you know he's into the technical bubble ideationally, and that will substitute, or his class identifiers will be all channeled through that world somehow. Even owning Bitcoin and not owning Bitcoin at this point in time is already kind of a
yeah. It flew for like 3 months, and then suddenly it's like my partner Matt in the marketing agency was like, "Oh yeah, I knew about Bitcoin when it started." He goes, you know, and I was like, "Yeah, if I had some extra money, I'd throw into that." And he's like, "I would have been, you know." I'm like, "Yeah," but that's that kind of, you know, in some ways it becomes like shaman reading chicken bones for the market, right? Isn't that
well, it
what
would
you
be
kind of
certainly
feel
an act
like?
of faith to buy it now, I should think. Yeah, and as it was when you bought it at $100 or $500 a share. But to go from 60,000 to 30,000 in the space of 2 weeks, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Well, you and I were both in Austin in the 80s when Dell and Whole Foods were just starting here.
Sure.
You know, that's all these sort of flame ups. But for every one of those, there's, you know, 100,000 that didn't. So that's where most of the investment money went, was those failed 100,000. But, well, it's fascinating. I think money to me, I try to stay away from it. I've never liked those worlds. I've never liked being into that briar patch. I completely see why, like when you get into the investor moment, like you are, where suddenly you're like, okay, you know, I don't really have a choice. I need to do some learning. I need to at least be able to see the scams coming at me fast and furious. You know,
I suppose. I mean, I suppose I could do a little old lady thing and just buy an annuity and sort of say, give it to me X number of dollars a month, and
oh
trust that you know I'll pay the. Basically, you pay them 1.5% to do that for you, right?
yeah,
So you know, and that's paralleled over on the other side with Social Security, which is its own little world that will do the same. You know, only you accumulated that over 35 years of employment. It is pretty fascinating, and so I'm intrigued that, you know, I don't know that there isn't a choice except that to have saved your money sort of ultimately lands you here,
that's funny.
and to not save money is another kind of class option, I suppose.
Yeah, I
Or
kind
to
of look at
borrow
it.
money and be in the hyper investor and buy Bitcoin with it. Now that
Yeah, I kind of look at it sometimes like it's they're just various hornets nests, right? And all you're trying to do is get in there and get some of the, well, hornets don't have honey, but get some of the honey without getting too stung. And you just don't know what's coming at you, you know? So ah but it's funny, like I said, the moving across these worlds, and now you're in a fourth world. You're over here in the finance world. I'm watching you. I'm seeing, oh yeah, I see what's kind of
well,
going.
I'm just becoming more and more aware, once again, to fold back to what I think is our point, is that um, it translates into political identifications and policies, and what one is willing to talk, you know. So, you know, I'm sure there are a lot of constructs around it, and maybe political scientists, some of them somewhere, are figuring this out, and sociologists are updating our models of class. But we're a long way from, you know, I think I always heard Stuart Hall attributed this. I don't know whether he did, the black British cultural historian, but that if somebody has to tell you have a class problem, you don't have a class problem. But I think that's probably not true in American society right now. I think people do need to be told that they have a class problem. We're just not sure what the problem is, or it's not really the same as the 1960s evaporation of the British caste system,
Right.
where there are 3 clear chairs and you know who you are. That's not what's going on here. You know, there's a lot of class mobility, but there's also a lot of hierarchies out there to subvert and substitute class identification with. So I think the whole identity project's really fractaled somehow, and there's money to be made in that confusion.
Yeah, for sure. I think
political capital for sure, as it turns out.
Well, and rhetorically, just the idea that the stories are breaking down, the characters are breaking down. Like you don't know exactly how to evaluate everything that's going on in that environment. It opens up rhetorical opportunity. And I see this a lot with even trying to do the rhetoric warrior stuff about giving people a rhetorician identity, like take control of your language, you know, your discourse. And if you allow like the public discourse, our public discourse has been shaped by business and marketing and capitalism. Horrific.
Right.
You know, like, and we just accept that as, oh yeah, of course, advertising is in our face all the time. And I'm like, well, it's kind of hard to do complicated political discourse, you know, democratic discourse when you also have all this other shit dumped into your public discourse. Just crowds everything out. So it becomes a real issue when you get into these crunches, I think, like we're in.
And I think the language of it is largely ahistorical. So I think we, you know, because of our sense of mobility, where we're at this week and where we will be, yeah, how good of an old folks home can I afford is probably my next big choice here, right? So that's going to be the biggest economic.
How nice a room do I want to die in?
Exactly. And well, the amenities, the food and the jolliness of the staff are both variables there.
That's exactly it, right? I mean,
yeah, when it boils right down to you, they'll wheel you out. They go pretty much the same way. But.
Yeah, you're going to be on a gurney one way or the other, but does it have a nice floral print, or is it just a white bed sheet?
Well, having been through this with 2 parents, yeah, I get it. At any rate, where was I headed? But yeah. Anyway, I lost it. Whatever.
That's all right. We'll pick it up. Well, thanks again. Good episode. Again, I know we kind of ramble around stuff, but I think there's lots of nuggets laying around.
In that rambling, if somebody's looking,
there's stuff on the ground. You know, pick it up and use it if you want. If not, hey, you know, go talk to an economist.
Some people who haven't thought about class lately might pick up 1 or 2. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, super fun. I will circle back around. We will do another Rhetoric Warriors Rhetorician Files here with Dave Payne when he settles down. You're going to go back. You're going to Seattle pretty soon, so we may
take a little time, but we'll be in touch. We'll see what happens.
Sounds good.
Bye now.
All right. Get out there and persuade people. They always need it.